Imagine standing in Stockholm in the winter of 1661. To buy a cow, you do not open a wallet. You heave a 19-kilogram slab of copper onto your shoulder. It is heavy, it is crude, it is a literal physical burden. Then a man named Johan Palmstruck, founder of Stockholm's Banco, offers a solution. A piece of paper, feather light. It fits right in your pocket. The people hailed it as a miracle of convenience. But within a few years, the bank collapsed. Palmstruck went to prison, and the paper became trash. We tend to laugh at the past, but look at your digital apps, your bank balance, even your cold wallet right now. We think we possess new technology, but history reveals a different truth. The form of money always changes to become more convenient, but the trap behind that convenience, that never changes. Today is not a lesson in economics. It is an autopsy of repetition. When money loses its physical weight, who is actually holding the scales? Open any standard economics textbook, and you will likely find the same origin story. It usually begins in a hypothetical village. A farmer has a surplus of chickens, but he needs shoes. The cobbler has shoes, but he does not want chickens. He wants wheat. This is the double coincidence of wants. A logistical nightmare. So the story goes, these rational villagers invented money to grease the wheels of commerce. They created a neutral medium of exchange to make trade efficient. It is a pleasant story. It is logical. It places you, the consumer, at the center of the economic universe, using money as a tool for your own liberty and convenience. There is just one problem with this story. It never happened. When anthropologists and historians went into the field from the Americas to the tribal societies of Africa, they found something unsettling. They could not find a single historical example of a barter economy evolving into a monetary economy. The village market where people swap chickens for shoes is a fantasy, projected backward by modern economists to justify the system we have today. The true origin of money is not about trade, it is about debt. And specifically, it is about violence. In early societies, money did not emerge to help you buy things. It emerged to help you avoid being killed. Consider the concept of wergeld, literally man-money, in ancient Germanic codes. If you injured a neighbor or killed a member of another tribe, the result would naturally be a blood feud, a cycle of violence that could destroy the community. To stop this, the tribe imposed a fine. A specific value was assigned to an eye, a hand, or a life. The first function of money was not to facilitate a transaction between a buyer and a seller. It was to settle a debt between an offender and a victim. This same logic applied to marriage. The bride price was not a purchase. It was a compensation to the bride's family for the loss of her labor and fertility. It was a social debt, quantified to maintain the peace. You can still see the scars of this history in the language we use every day. Consider the word pay. We think of paying as a neutral act of handing over value, but the root of the word is much older. It comes from the Latin pacare. Pacare does not mean to exchange. It means to pacify, to make peace, to appease. When you paid, you were literally pacifying a creditor or a potential enemy. You were settling a score to restore the status quo. This distinction changes everything. If money was invented for trade, then it is a tool of freedom, a way to get what you want. But if money was invented for tribute and restitution, then it is, and always has been, a tool of social engineering. It is a system designed to quantify your obligations to the tribe, to the temple, and eventually to the state. It turns complex human relationships into a mathematical balance sheet. So the next time you tap your card or send a crypto transaction, remember, you are not just exchanging value. You participate in a 5,000-year-old ritual of debt settlement. The system was never designed to set you free. It was designed to keep the peace, by making sure everyone knew exactly what they owed. But if money is a debt, that debt must be represented by something physical, something that cannot be argued with. And that search for an unarguable object led humanity to the most enduring illusion of all. If you were a trader in 1200 BC, traveling from the Maldives to West Africa, you would not carry gold. You would carry a small glossy sea snail shell called the cowrie. It seems absurd to the modern mind. Why would civilizations across 3 continents value a useless piece of calcium carbonate? It was not because it was beautiful. It was because it was impossible to forge. In a world without sophisticated machinery, you could not manufacture a cowrie shell. You had to find it. The supply was limited by nature, not by the whims of a tribal chief. For thousands of years, this simple shell solved the problem of trust better than any government decree. But as trade expanded, the shell reached its physical limits. It could break. It was bulky in large quantities. The world needed something denser, something harder. Enter the metals: copper, silver, gold. We often think we chose gold because it glitters. That is vanity. We chose gold because it is chemically boring. It does not rust. It does not tarnish. It does not disappear. But the true power of gold was not its durability. Its true power was political. Gold served as a natural brake on authority. A king could command an army. He could rewrite the laws. But he could not command the earth to produce more gold. He could not print it. For a brief moment in history, money was an object of direct ownership. If you held the coin, you held the value. There was no middleman. There was no server. There was no bank manager who could freeze your access. The value was in your hand. But this system had a fatal flaw. a flaw that would eventually destroy it. Direct ownership is heavy, and direct ownership is dangerous. Walking across medieval Europe with a bag of gold coins was a good way to get your throat cut. So the market invented a solution. You would take your heavy, dangerous gold to a goldsmith. He would lock it in a secure vault, and in return he would give you a piece of paper, a receipt. This receipt was a claim check. It said, "Whoever holds this paper owns the gold in my vault." It was brilliant. It was light, it was efficient. You could trade the paper without ever moving the metal. But in that moment of convenience, a silent, catastrophic shift occurred. You stopped holding the asset. You started holding a promise. You traded possession for access. You traded the certainty of physics for the integrity of a human being. And history teaches us one consistent lesson. Whenever a human being is given custody of your wealth, he will eventually find a way to use it for himself. The goldsmiths noticed something interesting. People rarely came back to redeem their gold all at once. The paper circulated forever. The gold just sat there. So the goldsmith asked himself a dangerous question. If nobody checks the vault, why can't I issue a few extra receipts? That question was the seed of modern banking. The moment the receipt left the goldsmith's hand, the link between money and reality began to stretch. It was only a matter of time before it snapped. While Europe was still stumbling through the dark ages, dragging heavy sacks of silver across muddy roads, the East had already solved the problem. 600 years before Sweden printed its first banknote, the merchants of Sichuan, China, were already trading with paper. It began in the 10th century, under the Song dynasty. The local currency was iron-heavy, cumbersome, and practically useless for large transactions. To buy a bolt of silk, you needed a cartload of iron coins. So 16 wealthy merchant families came together and created a solution. They called it jiazi. It was a private receipt, a promise. You deposit the heavy iron, you get a light sheet of mulberry paper. Because these 16 families were respected, their paper was as good as gold. The system was efficient, it was voluntary, and it was private. But in the year 1023, the Song government noticed something irresistible. They saw that these merchants had effectively created value out of thin air, and the state wanted that power for itself. The government declared a monopoly. They banned the private issuance of jiazi. They established a state-run exchange bureau. At first, they played by the rules. They set a strict reserve ratio. For every 1,250,000 strings of paper money, they held 360,000 strings of metal in the vault, a reserve of roughly 28%. It was honest. But honesty in politics has a very short half-life. The Song dynasty faced constant wars on its northern borders. Wars are expensive. Raising taxes is unpopular. But printing paper? That is silent, and it is free. Slowly, the discipline eroded. The vaults stayed empty, but the printers ran hot. The exchange bureau pumped out paper to pay soldiers and suppliers. The inevitable happened. Prices soared. The paper lost its value. The people holding the bag were not the officials who printed it, but the commoners who trusted it. This reveals a historical pattern that has never been broken. Financial innovation almost always begins in the private sector, driven by a desire for efficiency, but it always ends with the state taking it over, driven by a need for revenue. The government claimed they took over the jiazi to stabilize the market and protect the people from private greed. In reality, they took it over so they could spend money they did not have. China provided the proof of concept, but it was a crude experiment. It took Europe a few more centuries to look at this model and perfect it. They realized that if you want to print money without people panicking, you don't just use a printing press. You build a magnificent building, give it a respectable name, and call it a central bank. In the year 1800, Napoleon Bonaparte did something that would change the world's financial architecture forever. He established the Bank of France. Mainstream history books will tell you this was a heroic act of statecraft. They claim it was a necessary cure for the financial chaos left behind by the French Revolution. It is a story of order overcoming disorder. But history is often written by those who benefit from the narrative. If you look at the records from 1796 to 1803, you find a very different picture. France actually had a brief successful period of free banking. Private banks were issuing their own notes and serving the needs of commerce quite effectively. There was no systemic collapse. There was no desperate cry for a central authority. So why did Napoleon interfere? The truth is much simpler and much more cynical. Napoleon was a man of war, and war requires an endless stream of capital. The free banks of Paris were private entities. They looked at Napoleon's credit rating and they saw a high-risk borrower. Consequently, they demanded high interest rates. They treated the emperor like any other customer who might go bankrupt. Napoleon did not want a partner, he wanted a servant. He created the Bank of France to solve his personal cash flow problem. He wanted a bank he could control, one that he could force to lend to the government at artificially low interest rates. He used the power of the state to crush the competition, granting his new bank exclusive privileges and eventually a monopoly on issuing banknotes in Paris. The Bank of France was not a cure for chaos, it was an instrument of coercion. This was not a unique French experiment. Across the English Channel, the Bank of England had been founded in 1694 for almost the exact same reason, to fund the Crown's wars and manage the growing national debt. In Europe, the rise of the central bank was never about protecting the purchasing power of the citizen. It was about marrying the printing press to the War Department. The central bank is often presented as a neutral referee, a group of wise technocrats keeping the economy in balance. But its DNA reveals a different identity. It is, and always has been, the back office for the world's largest debtor, the government. Once this machine was perfected, the state no longer had to ask the people for permission to spend. They just had to manage the machine. But as this machine grew, it created a permanent tension between two groups of people. A tension that acts like a massive invisible pendulum, swinging back and forth through history until it eventually destroys everything in its path. To understand why your purchasing power disappears, you must stop looking at daily price charts and start looking at a conflict as old as civilization itself. It is what we call the pendulum of quality versus quantity. This is a meta-theory of history, a perpetual struggle between two opposing forces, the creditor and the debtor. On one side you have the creditors. They prioritize quality. They want money to be scarce, stable, and difficult to produce. If they lend you $100 today, they want that $100 to buy the same amount of bread or more, 10 years from now. For them, deflation is a victory. Inflation is a theft. On the other side, you have the debtors. They prioritize quantity. If you owe $1 million, you want the money supply to explode. You want money to be everywhere. Because when money is abundant, it becomes cheap, and your debt, the actual weight of what you owe, shrinks. For the debtor, inflation is the only way out. History is simply the record of this pendulum swinging back and forth. But there is a thumb on the scale. The state is almost never a creditor. Throughout history, the state is the largest, most consistent, and most desperate net debtor in the system. Whether it was a Roman emperor debasing silver coins or a modern government issuing trillions in bonds, the motive is identical. They owe more than they can ever pay back. This creates a natural gravitational pull toward quantity. The state has a biological necessity to make money worth less. When you hear officials talk about stimulating the economy or maintaining target inflation, what they are actually doing is pushing the pendulum toward the debtor's side. They are choosing to favor the borrower over the saver. This is the dry forensic reality of our financial system. It is not an accident that the dollar has lost over 90% of its value in a century. It is a feature of a system run by the world's biggest debtor. If you are a person who works hard, saves cash, and lives within your means, you have unknowingly joined the quality camp. You are a creditor to the system, but the system is run by people who benefit from quantity. You are standing on the tracks, holding a bag of quality, while a high-speed train of quantity is heading straight for you. In a fight between the person who saves the money and the person who has the power to print it, you can guess who loses every time. But the pendulum cannot swing toward quantity forever. Eventually it reaches a point where the link to reality is so stretched that the entire mechanism risks a total snap. August 15, 1971, a Sunday evening. President Richard Nixon walked into the Oval Office and performed a financial sleight of hand that effectively ended a 5,000-year era of monetary history. He temporarily suspended the convertibility of the US dollar into gold. The temporary suspension is now over half a century old. In that moment, the dollar stopped being a representative currency, a receipt for something real, and became fiat. Value was no longer anchored to a physical, scarce metal that required labor to mine. Instead, it was anchored to authority. It was value by decree. Modern economists from the new Keynesian school often describe money in this era as a veil, a neutral layer over the economy that does not truly affect long-term outcomes. But if you look at the forensic data since 1971, you see a veil that is more like a strangling cord. Once money became untethered from reality, the debtors, the state, won the battle for quantity. Since there was no longer a physical limit to how many dollars could exist, debt became the primary export of the global economy. This is where the theory of progress meets a brutal reality. Since 1971, worker productivity has continued to climb, yet real wages for the average person have remained largely stagnant. We are producing more, yet we are not earning more. Why? Because the new money being printed does not flow into your paycheck. It flows into financial assets. It flows into the hands of those closest to the printing press, the elite who understand that in an era of infinite quantity, the only way to survive is to own the things that cannot be printed. We are living in an experiment where the only thing holding the system together is common acceptance and the authority of the government. It is a system built entirely on collective belief. But belief is a volatile fuel. History shows that when people realize their labor is being exchanged for a promise that is being diluted every second, they do not just get angry, they start looking for an exit. They look for something that cannot be manipulated by a decree. They look for the digital equivalent of that 19-kilogram copper slab, something with the weight of physics but the speed of light. In 2009, as the dust from the global financial collapse was still settling, a white paper appeared on a cryptography mailing list. It introduced Bitcoin. Mainstream media often portrays this as a speculative bubble for the tech-savvy. But if you look at its DNA, Bitcoin is something else entirely. It is synthetic money, a return to the principles of the cowrie shell and the gold coin but upgraded for the digital age. It functions as digital gold because it reintroduces a brake on authority. Like gold, it requires work to produce and is limited by a mathematical ceiling. For the first time since 1971, there is a way to hold an asset that a central bank cannot simply click into existence. But the state, the world's largest debtor, has no intention of letting the pendulum swing back to quality without a fight. The empire is striking back with CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Do not be misled by the terminology. CBDCs are not government crypto. They are the ultimate evolution of fiat. While physical cash allows for a small degree of privacy and direct ownership, a CBDC is money that is purely digital and strictly conditional. This is where the concept of authority meets absolute surveillance. A CBDC is programmable money. It allows the issuer to know exactly what you buy, where you buy it, and even to expire your savings if you do not spend them fast enough to stimulate the economy. We are approaching the final oscillation of the pendulum. On one side, we have decentralized assets, money governed by physics and demand. On the other, we have centralized digital ledgers, money governed by total authority and surveillance. This is the hidden architecture of the 21st century. Technology has not solved the ancient conflict between the creditor and the debtor. It has simply accelerated it. The war for your purchasing power has moved from the battlefield to the server room. And as the history of money has shown us, the winner is usually the one who realizes that the game is being played before the final whistle blows. We have reached the end of the records, but the most important part of this investigation isn't what happened in 1661 or 1971. It's what happens when you step out of this logic and look at the world around you today, from the cowrie shells of ancient trade to the heavy copper slabs of Sweden. From the paper notes in your wallet to the digital code flickering on your screen today, the packaging has evolved, but the underlying architecture has never changed. Money in its final analysis is a social contract. But history reveals a cold, consistent truth. This contract is perpetually rewritten by those who hold the power to issue it. We cannot return to a time of bartering chickens for shoes, nor can we stop the digital era that is already at our doorstep. But there is one choice that remains yours. You can choose to hold your wealth in the form of authority, where its value is subject to the whims of those who can print more at any moment. Or you can seek scarcity, where the laws of mathematics and physics act as your final line of defense. The answer to this dilemma is not found in this video. It will be found in your portfolio tomorrow morning. If you want to continue decoding the hidden mechanisms of money, the parts of history that standard textbooks usually forget to mention, leave the number 1 in the comments below. And make sure to subscribe to Financial Money History. The truth is only for those who are brave enough to look directly at it. Until next time.